Hello, biology students. This is going to be a really quick introduction and demonstration of some of the skills you might need with questions that are related to taxonomy. Taxonomy is the classification of organisms. When we say classifications, means grouping. When we group them, we put names to things. And so you're going to be familiar with some of this already, and it's pretty intuitive. And there's just a couple skills that I want you to learn. So what we have here, this crazy looking diagram is actually called a cladogram. We'll see a cladogram a little bit later and learn how to use these. This is a ginormous one with lots and lots of names. And don't worry that the names look like these things you can't pronounce. That's okay. But what we're really showing here is this is the relatedness of life. And so life all has certain things in common. We look at the common thread that binds everything together is DNA. And how we actually change DNA into RNA, and then that RNA into proteins. Every organism does that. So when we did that protein synthesis, bacteria do it the same way that we do it. Plants do protein synthesis the same way we do it. They all use almost the exact same amino acids. They all use that same genetic code. So remember when we had the table that showed like ACT, or excuse me, UAG equals this, and TAC equals start, then we all use that same exact code, which is really pretty solid evidence that we all kind of evolved from some sort of a common ancestor. What I want to draw your attention here are what are called the six, are called the six kingdoms. Now, when we say kingdoms, these are the biggest groupings of life. And so there's Archaebacteria, or eubacteria, Eubacteria are all the bacteria you're familiar with. The ones here called gram-positive, this is where strep would fit into, and staph infections. There are also some other kinds of bacteria that most of them live in the oceans. Some of them are actually extinct. When I say, with this little bullet point up here, this is 99% of life that has lived on Earth is extinct. Life is continuously replenishing the Earth. It's continuously dying off. There are things called mass extinctions, which means that up to 50%, or actually at least 50% of the life on Earth dies off because of some sort of an event. And we as humans, we haven't actually been around for any of these mass extinctions, but our ancestors have been. Another one of the kingdoms is Archaebacteria. These are a really interesting kind of bacteria, different from these bacteria, but Archaebacteria are ones that can make their own energy, so to speak. So they can actually use the heat from the earth and actually produce glucose and the energy that they need, whereas all of the living things, they actually do rely on the sun for their energy in some way, whether that's the sun through photosynthesis, or whether that's by eating things that rely on photosynthesis. So Archaebacteria are really strange. We're learning more and more about them. Most of them live deep down in the oceans, and especially these things called thermoproteus. The fact that they need heat. So they live in these 1,000-degree vents coming up out of the bottom of the ocean. Protista are single-celled organisms. We can see those with microscopes. These are some things. This malaria. Remember we talked about malaria was that disease caused by mosquitoes. It's because of a protozoan living inside of that mosquito that gets into us. Fungi is another one of those kingdoms. So fungi, these are interesting organisms. They used to be actually put with plants, but we found that they don't do photosynthesis. And when they don't do photosynthesis, they can't be a plant. And so these actually live on dead organisms. They decompose those things, but they're their own group. But they do have cell walls, which is interestingly enough. Plants, any organism that is multicellular meaning many cells, and do photosynthesis. And so yeah, you're familiar with plants. And then Animalia. Animalia are going to be these multicellular organisms that don't do photosynthesis, but they are ingestive, meaning they take in their food through some sort of a mouth part. And when you think of animals, just don't think of the animals that live in zoos. Animals are actually coral. Animals are also sponges that live in oceans. Well, which I guess could also be in zoos as well, but we usually think of those being more in aquariums. Um, those are the 6 different kingdoms, the 6 different big categories, the big buckets that we would put any new organisms. If we find a new organism, we need to figure out which bucket they go into. And then if you find a new organism, you get to name it. Now, speaking of that naming, then, we then give things taxonomic names or classification names. And so there are the different names of different categories. Like for you, you have a first, a middle, and a last name, perhaps. So my name, Brian Douglas Ackert. So BDA. Okay, Brian Douglas Ackert, first, middle, and last. Now, some people could have a name back here. Maybe they're a junior, and so they have another name. And so that's usually good enough for us to identify us, to keep us different from other humans and make us be able to so you remember when you have a name, you have a face to put with that. In science, we actually give things 7 names, and actually more than that, but this is good enough for us. So kingdom, the one we already talked about. Then there's phylum, and don't really worry about, I don't even think you ever have to really memorize these things, but I have a little saying that will help us remember this. So kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Now, genus and species are important because these are like our most specific name. So this would be a little more like if I want to talk about Quercus alba. Quercus alba is actually a white oak. Then if I were writing that in a scientific journal or reading about it, it would say Quercus alba, and I would know that is the white oak, and that's the only organism that would have that name. So it's much like our name that we would give human beings. Now there's a little saying to help you remember these, kind of keep them in order. I learned this saying: kings play chess on fat gorilla stomachs. Or fat gorillas' stomachs. So kings play chess on fat gorillas' stomachs. And I just kind of picture that these kings are playing chess on these gorillas that are laying down, and they're playing chess against one another. Kings play chess on fat gorillas' stomachs. Some people say funny gorillas. They're like telling jokes because they think, so whatever you want to use for the adjective of gorillas. Fancy, I don't know, famished, they're really hungry, I don't know. Now, so I've got 4 organisms here, and I've given you the names of these things. And you might actually a lot of times you can actually tell the name of the organism by looking at the genus and species. So Panthera tigris. What do you think that is? Well, I'm going to guess many of you probably guessed it's a tiger. You're right. And these are its names: Animalia, Chordata, Mammalia. Ooh, mammal. I know it's a mammal. In fact, all these things in here are mammals. It's carnivorous. It's put in the carnivora group. Felidae means it's in the cat group, and there's lots and lots of things in the cat group. And then panther is a panther group, and tigress. Now, the more names you have in common with an organism, the more closely related. The more closely you would be put on a cladogram close to that organism. Now, let's look at organism number 2. How closely are they related? Well, if you notice, they're actually related down to the order. So we would say that they're related down to order. They have the same order. That's pretty closely related. They're both mammals. They're both carnivorous. And this one is in Canidae. Canidae is the dog family. And so if you look at Vulpes pardus, and Vulpes pardus actually ends up being a wolf. I think it's gray wolf, I want to say. I think that seems right. So they're related, but they're only related down to a certain point. Now, if we look at organism number 3, let's compare it to number 1 and see how closely they're related. Well, they have the same kingdom, the same phylum, the same class, the same order, the same family, the same genus, and then the same species. And so, believe this is, oh gosh, all of a sudden, I should have looked this up to set ahead of time. It's not that important, but it's another cat family. So I think this might have been something like, mountain lion, something like that. I think that might be it, because mountain lions are kind of a grayish color, and this pardus I know kind of means gray. Yeah, I'm pretty confident in that. And so this Panthera pardus is really closely related to number 1, to the tiger. They're very close. They're cats. They're in the panther family, really closely related. Now, if we look at animal number 4, okay, if we look all the way down, Homo sapien. Oh, that's us. That's me. Now, how close are we related to these other 3? Well, we're related down to the class. And so we have the class in common. We're all mammals, but then we get into the primate group. So that's how you can kind of analyze this. Just the most important thing to understand is that the more names you have in common, the closer related. So generally speaking, okay, so let's compare this person, this one, and this one. So these first 3, and you're just given these 3 names, and you're asked to figure out how close related are they? Which 2 are most closest related? You might be tempted to say that the parduses are, these pardus. That is not correct. You actually, because this pardus actually is just an adjective that describes that organism. So like this was gray. And so that doesn't really show us relatedness. The genus, if they have the same genus, because if they have the same genus, everything above that was also in common. So if you're looking to see if things are closest related, if they share a genus, that they're closely related. If they share, they'll never share a genus and a species unless you're given something called a subspecies, which I don't think you're ever going to be given, at least on the state tests. Maybe if you take a zoology class someday. So look to see if they have the genus in common and pick those ones. Those are the ones that are closest related. Okay, next I want to talk really quickly, sorry, take a sip of my coffee, about how we use an identification key. Now, a key is a device that can be used to help identify or name an unknown organism. In college, I had to find 50 different plants and I had to identify them. And I actually have a book. You can ask me to see this book. It's about 1,000 pages long of a key that would identify any plant that you would find in West Virginia. Now, I didn't go to school in West Virginia, but there is no Plants of Ohio. And so we used the West Virginia book, which it was pretty much the same. Now, how do we use this? Well, it's actually really straightforward. What we do is we start up here at the top with 1A and 1B, and we're figuring out which of these statements is true about the organism we're identifying. So here's what we're finding. So everybody probably recognizes the dragonfly. Well, I've only given the genus and species over here, so I don't know necessarily, I can't just go to dragonfly. I guess I could Google it, but hey, we can't Google things on state tests. And so here, okay, so I'm going to read the statement and figure out which one's true. The organism has wings evident. The organism does not have wings. Does it have wings? It does. So I'm going to go to 2. I come down here to number 2. The organism has wings that are parallel to the body, above the abdomen, or that has wings that are perpendicular to the side of the abdomen. Now, hopefully you understand. I know y'all had geometry. The wings are like this. Is that parallel or is that perpendicular? You better identify that as perpendicular. So they are perpendicular. And so if the wings would have been coming back like this, so there are some things like moths and things that have wings that kind of come back and are parallel to them. So we're picking perpendicular, so that's number 4. So I jump down here to number 4. Okay, so we did these 2. Now jump number 4. The organism's wings do not have white speckles near the tips. The organism's wings have white speckles near the tips. Do you notice any white speckles out here towards the tips? I do not. This is this organism right here, Pachydiplax longipennis. And so where it actually gets its name, I'll let you kind of, their Latin names, don't worry so much about how the Latin works out. We don't need to know Latin. But this is a dragonfly. So that's how you use these. You just jump around, and you just follow the traits where they take you, and you figure out what it is at the end. Now, if you are working one of these and you ever get like a second organism being exact same as that first one, something's gone wrong. And we'll practice this a little bit in the quizzes questions that will come after this. So that actually concludes what I wanted to talk about with in this little taxonomy section. Just understanding the idea of these different kingdoms. They are all related. We have kind of this common lineage. There are certain things that keep us in common. identifying on here that if you, because this is a question I've seen on the state test about every year, they'll give you a list of organisms and they'll say which two are closest related. Pick the ones that have the same genus. Don't pick the ones that have the same species. Now, if they give you more data to go by, then just remember the more names you have in common, the closer related you are. And then finally, using a taxonomic key. Sometimes it's called an identification key or taxonomic key. Just read the statement, start at number 1, and read through and just follow where it tells you to go. All right. Thanks for listening, and can do the questions that follow this lesson. Thanks. Bye.